Today is Transfiguration Sunday. It's a day on the church calendar when we remember mountaintop story. The one where Jesus is transfigured and shines like the sun with dazzling white clothes. It's a story where God calls Jesus, my son, my chosen, and tells Jesus' followers to listen to Jesus. Transfiguration Sunday falls on the Sunday before Lent begins. It's kind of a Lent Eve. Lent's when Christians focus on the Jesus story as Holy Week approaches. That dark week when Jesus was betrayed, captured, abandoned, killed. There's an Easter light at the end of that week, and there is this story of light from the lectionary before our Lenten journey toward Holy Week begins in the church calendar. So the Lenten journey has these bookends of light on Transfiguration Sunday and on Easter Sunday. And on a reading from Luke, 3 of Jesus' followers, Peter, James, and John, go up a mountain with Jesus, and they encounter the greatest lawgiver, Moses, and the greatest prophet, Elijah, and Jesus and God in this mystical event. God's everywhere, of course, but high up on mountains, God often seems more tangible and accessible in the Bible. Abraham hears God's call to end human sacrifice upon Mount Moriah. Moses sees God in a burning bush on Mount Horeb. God gives the law to Moses there on Mount Sinai. And the people of Israel first glimpse the Holy Land from a mountain. Elijah defeats the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, and Jerusalem, that great city at an altitude of 2,670 feet, is also known as Mount Zion. Like other Bible heroes, many stories of Jesus occur on mountains. Jesus goes up a mountain to pray. He gives a sermon on the mount. He triumphantly marched into Mount Sinai and wept on the Mount of Olives. He was crucified on a hill, Mount Zion, called Calvary. And he rose from a tomb nearby. Mountains in the Bible are where many sacred events happen. And in our story today, a very detailed, mystical, seemingly otherworldly encounter unfolds on that mountain where the Transfiguration occurred. Moses, the greatest lawgiver, and Elijah, the greatest prophet, appear side by side with Jesus. And God speaks to Jesus' followers and tells them, Jesus is my son, my chosen. Listen to him. Moses and Elijah are honored as great, but for Christians, Jesus becomes the greatest lawgiver and prophet and Lord. He's the one whom God instructs Christians to listen to. And one way to hear the story is that it really occurred. For those of us who have experienced mystical events, this story can ring true. But for many of us, the mystical nature of the story and events described can strain our belief. In our experience, people's clothes don't glow and dead people can't be seen. And God doesn't roll in like a fog that literally talks, speaks. For those of us who have trouble believing today's lesson as an historic fact, the Transfiguration story can nonetheless still ring true. Indeed, as metaphor, we can hear the Transfiguration story ringing the same truth, whether we believe it really happened or we doubt it literally occurred. The Transfiguration story as a metaphor can be heard as a symbolic representation of how Jesus' first followers experienced Jesus. And if we think about it, how Jesus' followers have experienced him ever since. Peter, James, and John represent Jesus' followers. Us. It's not easy being a Christian. The path following Jesus is a steep climb up a mountain. We hope that by following Jesus on his way to the top, we will experience God in our lives. And if we make the climb with Jesus and reach the top, we realize that Jesus is a dazzling light. He's like the sun. His very being glows. It glows in our lives and in our perception of him. And this reflects the gospel accounts where the fully human Jesus finds a way to put the light of God, of love, out there on his sleeves. Everything about him glows with God, with love. Jesus' way for his followers isn't about just experiencing Jesus' mystical, continuing experiential presence. It's about striving as best we can to also be that presence. It's about turning the spark of God within our own being out so that the God who is love shines in and through us as a light to the world, maybe even sometimes a dazzling one. When we follow Jesus, we learn to respect the law and the prophets. Moses and Elijah are honored and sacred to us as they are to Jesus. We see the law and the prophet standing alongside Jesus. Peter sees the mystical Moses and Elijah and Jesus, and he knows it's a good thing. But he tries to sort of catch them like lightning bugs in a human-sized containers on that mountaintop. Like others in the past, and even today, Peter fails to comprehend that the sacred law and prophets and Jesus and God are not to be trapped in containers that we humans construct. And to prove it, inrolls in the sacred God, bigger than life, in the most uncontrollable form in creation, a cloud that overshadows the living, the dead, and even the glowing. God overshadows all we can perceive as humans and will not be contained, cannot in the end even be fully explained. God remains a mystery, even after we follow the way that Jesus shows us up the mountain. It's a bright, fluid, foggy mystery that surrounds and envelops us. And this is the greatest, most hopeful part, that sacred mystery speaks to us. God cares enough to speak to us, mere human beings. God speaks to us. In our tradition, the United Church of Christ, we say that God is still speaking. Our God is the still speaking God. And the story of the Transfiguration can have much meaning in that regard. Following the way of Jesus up the mountain does not mean we only find the law and the prophets and a mystical, glowing Jesus awaiting us, but that God will speak to us even if we are terrified, even though God remains a bright, fluid shroud of mystery that cannot be captured and contained in human-built dwellings like tents, temples, churches. The Transfiguration story can be heard as a metaphor for how the early church experienced following Jesus and how we can still experience following Jesus today. The message in our reading, whether we believe the story is history or metaphor, is this: listen to Jesus. We can find the light through the way up the mountain to God that Jesus shows us, that he taught us. We can experience the mystery of the law, prophets, Jesus, and God if we follow him. And most importantly, if we listen to him. As we gather here on this kind of Lent Eve, we know that in the weeks ahead we will consider the dark and scary things about earthly power's response to Jesus' message of unconditional love. But we also know that there is light, and that the light is Jesus, light before, during, and after the scary responses by earthly powers that tried, but utterly failed to extinguish that light and his love. The light of Jesus, the love of Jesus, can't be extinguished ever. He lives. That light and love shines from mountaintop to mountaintop, and it can shine in us too if we listen to God's Son, God's chosen, Jesus, who do as the still speaking God instructs.